You don't have a laziness problem. You have a threat detection problem, and your brain is working exactly as designed. This is Level Up 365, and today we're answering a question most people never think to ask. Why do intelligent, motivated, self-aware people consistently fail to begin the very things they say matter most? There's a moment almost everyone has experienced. You open your laptop, the document is right there. You know exactly what you need to write. Your cursor blinks, and then, without really deciding to, you open a new tab. Not because you need to, just because it's easier. You scroll for a while, maybe you check email, maybe you watch a short video. 20 minutes pass, the document is still there, untouched. And you close the laptop feeling slightly ashamed, telling yourself you'll try again tomorrow. That scene is not about laziness. It is about your nervous system doing what it evolved to do, protect you from something it has labeled as unsafe. Most people frame starting as a willpower issue. They wake up, feel the weight of an unstarted task, assume something is wrong with them, and spend the day in a low-grade cycle of guilt and distraction. But that framing, that not starting equals character failure, is not just wrong, it makes things worse. Because once you believe you are the problem, you stop looking for the real mechanism. The real mechanism is hiding in plain sight. The human brain did not evolve to complete projects. It evolved to survive threats. And while modern threats look nothing like ancestral ones, the system that processes them is fundamentally the same. Your nervous system does not distinguish well between a predator in the grass and a blank document on your screen. Both trigger the same core question: is this safe to engage with? When the answer is uncertain, the default is to delay. Delay is not failure in biological terms. Delay is caution. Caution kept your ancestors alive. The problem is that caution designed for physical danger is catastrophically poorly suited to creative, intellectual, or long-term work. Here's where most people stop. They hear that and they think, okay, my brain sees it as a threat, but they don't go deeper. So let's go deeper. The threats are real, just not the ones most people identify. The first hidden threat is identity exposure. Before you start, you are still someone who could succeed. Your potential is intact. The moment you begin, the gap between your imagined version and your actual output becomes visible, to you and potentially to others. For many people, self-worth is tied to perceived capability. As long as the work is unstarted, that identity is safe. Starting risks revealing that the capability you believed you had does not quite match what you can produce right now. That gap is genuinely painful, and your brain tries to protect you from it. Your brain would rather protect your identity than prove your potential. The second hidden threat is commitment. Starting is a declaration. It says, "This is real. I am doing this. This is who I am now." If you have abandoned things before, and most of us have, beginning again activates the memory of every previous start that did not lead anywhere. The pain is not about this project. It is the accumulated weight of every time starting did not finish. Your brain pattern matches. It says, "We have been here. We know how this goes." So it tries to skip the pain entirely by not beginning at all. You are not avoiding work, you are avoiding exposure. The third hidden threat is loss of control over the outcome. Once you start, reality enters the equation. The project might not work. The response might be silence or rejection. The result might confirm a fear you have been holding quietly for years. Not starting is, strangely, a form of control. It preserves the possibility of a good outcome without risking the confirmation of a bad one. Psychologists call this self-handicapping. It is not consciously strategic. It is a reflex that feels like reluctance, but is actually protection. Each of those threats is real, but understanding them separately is not enough. It is what happens when they combine. Here is the loop. You assign high importance to a task. High importance triggers threat signals. You avoid beginning to escape those signals. Because you avoided, the task looms larger the next day. Looming larger increases its perceived importance, which intensifies the threat signals. Avoidance intensifies, the cycle deepens. The longer you wait, the heavier the task becomes. Each pass through this loop generates evidence. Evidence that you are someone who does not follow through. Evidence that this kind of task defeats you. Evidence that the gap between who you want to be and who you are is real and maybe permanent. That evidence is what makes the problem feel like a character flaw instead of a system failure. You are not watching yourself be lazy. You are watching yourself accumulate proof that the threat assessment was correct. A 2013 study in psychological science found that people high in self-compassion are significantly more likely to start difficult tasks after failure, not because they care less, but because they do not interpret one struggle as evidence of permanent inability. Self-compassion breaks the loop at the evidence stage. It refuses to convert a difficult start into a verdict about identity. But self-compassion is not a complete answer. It changes how you interpret the evidence, but it does not change the brain's initial risk calculation. You need to change that calculation at the source. So if the problem is threat assessment, the solution has to work at that level, not at the level of motivation or discipline. Here is the counterintuitive insight. Making starting easier is not about lowering the stakes in your mind. It is about changing what starting means. Most people try to start correctly. They want the first attempt to represent something, to signal they're serious, competent, committed. That framing puts enormous weight on the first action, which is exactly what triggers the threat response. If the first attempt has to be good, starting becomes an identity event, and identity events are high risk by definition. The alternative is to make starting deliberately meaningless, not in a dismissive sense, but in a technical sense. The first action should carry no evaluative weight whatsoever. Not, I am going to write the first paragraph, but I am going to type words on this page for 3 minutes and delete everything afterward if I want to. Not, I am going to start this workout, but I am going to put on my shoes and stand next to the equipment. Not, I am going to work on the project, but I am going to open the file and just look at it. This sounds trivial. It is not. What you are doing is bypassing the threat evaluation by giving the brain a genuinely low-stakes starting point. No identity exposure because nothing counts yet. No commitment pressure because nothing is declared. No outcome uncertainty because there is no outcome being pursued. Anne Lamott called this shitty first drafts in Bird by Bird. The insight was not about lowering standards. It was about decoupling the act of beginning from the act of performing. These are two separate cognitive tasks, and most people collapse them into one, which is exactly why starting feels so impossible. Once motion exists, the threat calculation shifts. A body in motion does not need to overcome the same resistance as a body at rest. Your brain, now engaged with the task rather than anticipating it, starts generating evidence in the opposite direction. Not, I am someone who avoids this, but I am someone who is doing this right now. That shift in real-time evidence is what makes continuation feel different from starting. Let me pause here for a moment because there is something important most people miss. They think the goal is to become disciplined, but discipline is downstream of safety. You cannot willpower your way past a nervous system that has decided something is threatening. You can only change what the nervous system classifies as a threat. That is why the meaningless start works. It is not a trick. It is working with how your brain actually processes safety and risk. How you interpret resistance also matters. Most people treat resistance as a stop sign. They feel friction and assume they are not ready. But resistance is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you are at the boundary of something meaningful. If it were easy, it wouldn't matter. Instead of asking, why is this so hard, ask, what is this trying to protect me from? That turns resistance into information. Environment and timing are equally important. You can redesign your environment so that starting is easier than avoiding. Make the starting action visible. Remove easy alternatives before they become options, because once they are there, your brain will take them, not because you are weak, but because it is efficient. And timing matters. The longer you think about starting, the harder it gets. Thinking builds expectation. Expectation creates pressure. Pressure increases resistance. So, when the action is clear, start within a short window. Not perfectly, not completely, just enough to cross the threshold. There is one final trap most self-help content ignores. It is possible to read all of this, feel a surge of insight, and then do nothing except feel smarter about why you are not doing anything. That is intellectual procrastination. Understanding becomes a substitute for action, and worse, a justification for delay. I need to fully integrate this first. The only way to break it is to create a binding mechanism. Choose one task you have been avoiding. Define the meaningless start for that task, the smallest, most trivial contact with zero expectation of quality. Set a timer for 5 minutes from now. When it rings, do it. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now. Because only action creates new evidence, and new evidence, not motivation, is what rewires the system. So here's the truth. You do not have a laziness problem. You have a threat detection system that was built for a world that no longer exists. It's doing its job, trying to protect you from identity exposure, from the weight of past commitments, from losing control over outcomes. But the work that matters most lives inside that uncertainty. It cannot be done safely. It can only be done in spite of the safety reflex. Understanding this does not make starting effortless, but it removes the layer of shame that makes the difficulty feel permanent. And once the shame is gone, you are left with one question: not whether you can start, but whether you are willing to face what starting will show you about yourself. Most of the time, the answer is yes. The only thing standing in your way is a system that hasn't realized the world changed, and a decision to act before it catches up. If that made you pause for a second, hit like and subscribe to Level Up 365, not for motivation, for clarity that actually leads to action.